We've covered Metal Chansey, Metal Mewtwo, and now it is time for Metal Zapdos. This Zapdos found some use back in the base fossil format, but kind of fell out of use because of cards like energy removal, making it really hard to even set up an attack. But it was reprinted in Legendary Collection, reborn into a format without energy removal. So in Neo On, it's a basic with 90 HP, no weakness, and a resistance to fighting, which is mainly going to come in handy against Donphan. And this is Metal Zapdos, so you know that fourth energy slot on its Thunder attack is going to be a Metal Energy. That way, if you flip Tails, it's only going to deal 10 damage to itself. And I'll go ahead and say up front, I do not like using this deck. I get what it's going for. It's very simple, very straightforward, but it's also very easy to deal with. 60 damage isn't going to get you a lot of OHKOs. You got stuff like Noctowl or Parasect, some support Pokemon maybe, but this deck relies a lot on Double Gust to get those easy kills, or it relies on Electabuzz or Pichu in order to clean up its mess and actually get those knockouts. Another big part of this deck is using that Thunderbolt every now and then to get some OHKOs, but then you have to do 4 more turns of setup, and I just do not enjoy that type of gameplay. But it was a fairly popular deck in Neo On, so I did want to cover it on the channel. Let's get into the deck list. One thing I will say about this deck is that it chose the tools it wanted to use and it went all in on them. So most of the trainers or supporters in this deck are going to be full play sets. There's not a whole lot of card variety here, which is a strength of this deck in that it doesn't need a whole lot of different types of tools to work. It just needs a few, but that's also a huge weakness because whatever shortcomings this deck does have, it doesn't really have reliable means to deal with those. As far as Pokemon go, we have a full playset of that Legendary Collection Zapdos, full playset of the Best of Game promo Electabuzz. Man, this deck is gonna look a lot like a base Neo deck, even though it's definitely not. We got 3 Pichu and 3 Cleffa in this deck, so you do have a bit of a stall tactic with your baby Pokemon, but mainly you are gonna want to start the game after you Eek, get a good refresher with Electabuzz, because Electabuzz can attack for a low energy cost, and you're gonna have to build up those Zapdos on your bench. You do not want to start the game with a Zapdos, then you would be in for a bad time. Not only does it require 4 energy to attack, but it also has a retreat cost of 3, so you're kind of stuck with it if you have to start with it. Depending on the matchup, Pichu can be very valuable for decks like Intake Cargo or any kind of Knocklock variant. They're gonna have lots of Pokemon with Pokemon powers, even decks that are using Muck, which was a lot. Pichu can come in really handy in spreading damage around and setting up Electabuzz and Zapdos for future knockouts. This deck will be utilizing that Oracle Bill combo, which basically gets you whichever cards you want out of your deck straight into your hand. In this case, it's going to be a way to get Metal Energy into your hand very quickly so that you can get it down on those Zapdos, but also filling your hand with those clutch cards you're going to need once Zapdos starts accumulating damage, like Scoop Up or a Double Gust if you want to get a surprise easy knockout. And as I was saying earlier, this deck is mostly playsets. Everything in this is in a full playset except for the Pichu and the Cleffa. So, full playset of Professor Elm, and that's pretty much just going to be your hand refresher. That's going to get those energy that you need into your hand, that way you can get them onto the field, and to have you rely less on Cleffa. That way, if you can start the game with Professor Elm in your hand, then maybe you don't even have to worry about using Eek, and you can just save yourself some potential trouble you can get into by laying down a bunch of baby Pokemon, since you do want to start attacking as soon as possible. If your opponent starts the game with a Pokemon with a power, then fully switch into Pichu. Start attacking with Pichu first over Electabuzz, but be careful how you use Pichu and Cleffa because this build does not run Focus Band, meaning that your babies still aren't completely vulnerable because they have that baby power, but they don't have the double protection of Focus Band that most people use with baby Pokemon. Playset of Fisherman so that you can get off the occasional Thunderbolt and get all of those energy back into your hand. But be very careful with that too, as if you have a Metal Energy attached so that you can use Thunder without taking too much recoil damage, whenever you use Thunderbolt, you're going to have to discard that additional metal energy as well, and because there's so many playsets of cards in this deck and you need room for a lot of lightning energy, there's not a way to get back the metal energy. There's no power charge in this deck. With the metal energy on Zapdos, you're still going to be taking 10 damage by using Thunder, but that can help you out in some cases if it's going to trigger a Goldberry, so that you can attach it before you attack, and then once you attack, it's automatically triggered, healing off that damage. Scoop Up's going to be for a similar situation where Zapdos has taken some hits, or an Electabuzz, and you don't want your opponent to take a prize, so you just scoop it up. All of those energy get discarded, but you've got Fisherman. Then you've got your playset of Metal Energy and 14 Lightning Energy. So, as you can see from this deck, it's a very solid trainer build, but it also doesn't leave a lot of room for other cards, for improvements, for other strategies. It's a very rigid playstyle that really just takes too much time for my taste. Just setting up a Zapdos, I think, is a huge waste of time. So many other decks could absolutely wreck you in the time that you're just there attacking with a Pichu or an Electabuzz. And I don't mean to just shit all over this deck for the entirety of the video. I just don't have fun playing this deck. I didn't even enjoy playtesting it at all. And when I had tried to sample in different cards to try to mix it up and try to make my own personal build, I just really couldn't make it work unless I took the Zapdos out. I think the Zapdos is the weakest part of the deck. And this is a time in the TCG where the electric typing was very weak. You weren't really hitting any major archetypes for weakness. So a lot of the time I just found myself preferring to just stick that metal energy on Electabuzz and use Thunder Punch. So the better version of Metal Zapdos would just be a Steelix deck with Electabuzz in it. But I will say Metal Zapdos is probably the only deck archetype I've seen that actually utilizes Berry. There's a lot of variants that don't use the Oracle Bill setup. They'll use one or the other and use that extra slot for a playset of Berry, as that's more likely to trigger after a couple turns of self-damage, as opposed to accumulating self-damage and damage from your opponent in order to trigger a Goldberry. But if you've got room for a playset of Berry, then why not just fit in some Focus Band for your baby Pokemon? And if you find yourself in the situation that I was in, where I just wanted to use Thunder all the time and never use Thunderbolt, so therefore the playset of Fisherman wasn't really being utilized, then you might want to look at a split, maybe run 2 Fishermen, 2 Town Volunteers, because Volunteers can get those energy back as well, even though it's into your deck instead of your hand, and it can also get back Pokemon cards. It was just a better version of Nightly Garbage Run, so for Neo-On decks, just as a standard, you run at least 1 copy of it. I feel like I've been playing this deck incorrectly, like there's some secret that made it good to where people would justify using it for a Neo-On deck. So let me know down in the comments if I'm doing something wrong, or if there's some specific matchup that this deck was designed to go up against. If you've got a request deck for Neo-On, chuck it down in the comments. Links to the socials are in the description. Looking forward to that dope as hell ostrich fighting Zapdos. Thanks as always for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.